right. Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good night to all of you. Good to be back. Um, my name is Sebold Noorda. I am chairing this particular session. While our first session um, was, in a way, sketching the background for most of universities' life and the challenges these days. In this session, we will focus on the background of tomorrow's program. Tomorrow we'll see the launch of a new Magna Carta, so to speak, the daughter of the 1988 Magna Carta. This daughter was born in 2020, and she is shown to the world tomorrow. She was conceived in 2019, born in 2020, and revealed right now. Why she was conceived, for what purpose the new Magna Carta was drafted as a sequel to the Magna Carta of 1988 is the topic of this particular session. We will be three speakers. Tamires Sampaio. Tamires is a member of the drafting group of the new Magna Carta. At the time, she was a student from Sao Paulo, Brazil. She now has graduated and is a lawyer and active in society and in politics, as well as in other things in the state of Sao Paulo in Brazil. But here she will speak as the former student member of the drafting group of the new Magna Carta. Before her, we will hear Patrick Dean, the present president of the Governing Council of the Magna Carta Observatory, and also a member of the Magna Carta 2020 drafting group. I had the pleasure being the chair of that drafting group, and that really was a pleasure for in the first place, because it was a very able and cooperative group that was drafting, a group of 8, 4 women and 4 men from all over the world, sharing university experience for a shorter or longer period of time. But apart from that, all very different. I used to compare that to the drafting group of the 1988 Magna Carta. They were all men like me, of my age and of my gender. So we came a long way in those 33 years to the present situation, where we had one could call it a normal committee with a gender balance and a wide age distribution. I was by far the oldest member of the group, so you know how young the others will be. Anyway, those 8 members of the drafting group I had the honor and pleasure of presiding over. That was, as I said, a pleasurable job, but it also felt like something that was an urgent task to do. And I'll try to explain why. And my first explanation echoes what Jamil Salmi said earlier in the first session. The 1980s had a very different kind of atmosphere, a different mood globally. In those days, we were all feeling that the old world order was in its last hours, in its last weeks, and that we were moving to a future that promised to be brighter. And one of those important aspects of that new future was a new openness to international collaboration, to international mobility for university people, for university students. And we were hoping for a new age in which much more collaboration between scholars and between universities would be taking place. And to prepare for that, we felt at the time that we needed to make absolutely clear what the basis, what the foundations would be in terms of values for those international collaborations. We wanted to make sure that universities, to be able to do what they ought to do their work well and to serve society well, needed autonomy, and that its participants, its members, needed academic freedom. Without that kind of a freedom, quality couldn't be guaranteed, openness towards the future couldn't be guaranteed, and we would not be able to really strike new ways of collaboration across borders. So the first Magna Carta Universitatum of 33 years ago, 1988, very much mirrored the mood of the time, laying a foundation for a positive period in which he would see new opportunities taken. If we are to characterize today's mood, it is in a way somewhat the opposite. If we look at the map of university autonomy or the map of university academic freedoms over the years, we see more difficulties and more deep challenges every other year. The situation seems to go downhill rather than uphill. A second qualification of those periods would be that since the 1980s, universities have been very, very successful in almost all parts of the world. Enrollment was increasing, funding was increasing, new institutions were added to the existing ones, and the results of academic work, both in teaching and in research, were seen as very, very important to societies. This morning it was referred to that we even labeled our societies and our economies as knowledge economies and knowledge societies. So the producers of that knowledge, universities, and people working in those universities, scholars and graduates, of course, had a very, very important role in society. And the paradox of the time is that if an institution is so important in a society, if an institution has so much success, there are many, many powers that want to control them, that want to make sure that what they are delivering, what they are producing, is in their interests. So with the enormous success of universities, we have seen the attraction of many, many interventions, political as well as economic powers in many places wish to make sure that their interests are being served in ways that are not always, to say the least, respecting university autonomy and academic freedom of individual scholars and students. It is this particular paradox between success and the increase of the number of interventions, these challenges, it's these challenges that require the global academy to stand up for their essential values, as well as at the same time clearly identify the responsibilities and commitments that are vital to universities around the world in the 21st century. Like in the 1980s, the universities drafting and underwriting the first Magna Carta, wanted to make clear the foundations of their work, the shared convictions of their scholarly work. And nowadays, it seems to be just as important to make clear what the universities see as non-negotiable basis for their work. And against the backdrop of these challenges, a less optimistic mood, a fear that freedoms are under more pressure, are going downhill in many places, and the experience of so many interventions into the autonomy and freedoms of the universities, we felt that a new Magna Carta would be useful. Not to change the basic convictions, but in the first place, to reiterate those basic convictions of autonomy and freedom. But on the other hand, because we felt we need to state these afresh with an eye on the present circumstances and with an eye on a global setting. And at the same time, we felt the need to be more explicit on the uses of those freedoms and that autonomy, the societal uses, the uses to the planet, the uses to mankind. So when I'm to explain what were the important reasons for this new Magna Carta to be drafted, why was it decided and why was it done? I want to give three answers to that. First of all, especially in times of pressure, of stress, of increasing challenges, it is important that communities like a university know what they stand for, know their values. Values are important beliefs or ideals shared by members of a community about what is good, what is bad, what is desirable, what is not. And they serve as broad guidelines of what you do. And why do they matter for universities? Well, for universities, these values are steering their profile setting. They are helping us decide what kind of an institution we want to be. They are steering to which interests we want to serve and why we do so. At the same time, there are also quality markers like integrity in research operations and fairness in the educational process. But basically, they help us to understand who we are. Institutional self-understanding, positioning in society is very, very difficult if you don't know why you do this, which values are steering you. So identifying and discussing and sharing core values is important to any university, and noticeably so in terms of turbulence, of politically competing claims, and also in terms of internal differences of convictions and opinions. So the first answer to why is that especially in times of political turbulence, values and knowing your values, discussing them and defining your joint values is an important responsibility for universities. The second reason is that we felt over the years that explaining these basic values of autonomy and freedom, of tolerance and respect is absolutely important, but it's not sufficient. Universities need to be also very explicit about what for. In the first Magna Carta, it was said universities are using their autonomy, they're using their academic freedom for the good of society, for the needs of the world. And now we felt we have to be more explicit. We have to be more precise in stating our responsibilities. And that's why the very first sentence of the new Magna Carta, which is being launched tomorrow, and which, by the way, you'll find in the text of the dossier that has been sent with the invitation to this meeting, so you have it all somewhere on your computer. The first sentence of this new statement is, universities acknowledge that they have a responsibility to engage with and respond to the aspirations and challenges of the world and to the communities they serve, to benefit humanity and contribute to sustainability. And it follows up by stating, intellectual and moral autonomy is the hallmark of any university and a precondition for the fulfillment of its responsibilities to society. That independence needs to be recognized and protected by governments and society at large, and defended vigorously by institutions themselves. And I add to that, this is not meant to serve as a selfish privilege for universities to set it apart from society, but exactly the opposite. This is an essential precondition for the university to be able to fulfill its role. So in this new statement, we have been speaking much more explicitly on these responsibilities and what they entail. And Patrick and Tamiris will no doubt speak on that in their contributions immediately after me. The third and final reason that I would like to mention why we thought we needed this fresh expression of basic university values is that to have such an international statement, a real global statement, supported not just by a drafting group from around the world, but based on a consulting process where universities from all over the world were commenting and participating. Why do we need such a joint statement? Because universities cannot achieve what they are to achieve in their societies, to their students and to our planet and the future of our planet by themselves. Only in collaboration with colleagues elsewhere, on the basis of shared engagements, do these ultimate goals come within reach. And that's exactly why launching the new statement is meant as an invitation to colleagues all around the globe to review the extent to which they live in their institutions in accordance with the principles and values and fulfill the responsibilities set out in it. And by joining the community of signatories, colleagues will help both themselves and other institutions to strengthen their position and influence in society for the good of all. So in short, values are as important as ever. To be explicit on what they entail is crucial in our day and age. And to stand united on a basis of the statement of joint ideals and joint values is a very important fortification of the position of universities in the world, wherever they are. We are not in this by ourselves. Well, these are my three answers to why and what for this new statement is crucial and useful. And I now hand over to Patrick, the president of Magna Carta Observatory, to add his answers and his views to this. Patrick, floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Seibold. And wonderful to follow you on those introductory remarks about what lay behind the impulse to begin work on this new document. I find in talking about the new Magna Carta, the first thing I always feel I want to do is to commend the authors of the original 1988 document for their percipience. We as Seibold will remember, concluded very early on in our discussions on the drafting team, we concluded that the principles of the original document remained valid, strongly so, if anything, felt even more relevant today. And so that's why, of course, in the new document, this is declared forthrightly. The principles laid out, it says, are as valid today as they were in 1988. In some ways, that's not surprising to find those principles have been enduring. After all, the authors of them were, as Seibold described them, experienced university leaders who understood very well the founding principles of these institutions. But what is surprising to me about the original document is the evidence of their far-sightedness, extraordinarily percipient about the future directions in which universities would have to move and the changes likely in the context for their operations. And it's not something that strikes you when you first read the document. The document, the old document, 1988, seems in the first instance a sort of declamatory statement of these principles. But as you look at it more carefully, you could see, firstly, the extent to which that document is in dialogue with its current historical moment. This described very well by Seibold in his comments. But then you dig a little deeper and you notice multiple intimations of what is to come in the future. There are, in other words, in the 1988 document, predictions about the future prospects of universities, globalization, accelerating technological change, education across the lifespan, sustainability and environmental awareness, cross-cultural relations, all of those things are adumbrated in that 1988 document, though they're not made that much of. They inform the declaration of those principles. But those are the things which, in a way, the new document, MCU 2020, picks up on and expands. These are things that were there in the original, sometimes explicitly named, sometimes requiring a little more effort to discern, but they're all the same. What's interesting about that earlier document, I find, is that some of those things, which we now see as utterly central to the conditions under which universities operate today, were hard to pick out because they were in tension with other parts of the document. So while I say that the document points us towards the globalization of higher education, in that context, the vision is of a European community rather than a global one. But of course, by extension, it implies this. I mean, one might even argue that looking carefully at the wording of the original document, what people had in mind was not just the European community, but the inner six nations. However, the point about a changing and increasingly international society, which was made in that document, holds. And it's even more valid now, 3 decades later on. The key point for me about the new document is made towards the end of its preamble. And there we are told, and this is the passage that Seibold drew our attention to, the principles laid out in 1988 are the necessary precondition for human advancement through inquiry, analysis, and sound action. The purpose of the new document is not to substitute a new set of principles, but instead to extrapolate on those original ones and to describe the sound action required of universities now in the 3rd decade of the 21st century. That's why, of course, the key word in the title of our conference is responsibilities, speaking there to what universities need to do with those principles and privileges that were articulated so well in 1988. So yes, this is new, I think, just to refine the point a bit, because while the 1988 document was largely and properly concerned, I think, with institutions' responsibility to the idea and to the traditions of universities historically, the emphasis in MCU 2020 is on institutions' responsibility, yes, to those traditions, but more broadly to society and to the planet. And as I said earlier, I mean, the kernel of that latter view was present in the first declaration, but in a somewhat more abstract way. So universities today have responsibility to engage with the, to engage with and respond to the aspirations and challenges of the world. Whereas the 1988 document spoke to the need to respect the great harmonies of the natural environment and of life itself, in MCU 2020, we speak directly to the question of sustainability. And if you take that assertion in the new document, this commitment to sustainability, along with the assertion elsewhere in the document that universities are part of global collegial networks of scientific inquiry, as well as the point that they're embedded in local cultures and simultaneously connected to global development, all of this, these three positions of universities that are laid out in the new document, this points the global academy towards more initiatives, like the IAU Global Cluster on Higher Education and Research for Sustainable Development, for example. We'll probably hear more about that, I expect, tomorrow from the president of the IAU. Now, just as the 1988 document was written in dialogue with its historic moment, so the MCU 2020 addresses several issues beyond sustainability that beset the pursuit of understanding and well-being across the globe. There is an emphasis, for example, on universities' duty to undertake research ethically and with integrity, producing reliable, trustworthy, and accessible results. And naturally, this is one of those timeless tenets, which ordinarily it would seem unnecessary to state, were it not for our present context, with which Jamil Salmi elucidated so well in the opening session earlier on. Because we live in a post-truth world in which the advice of scientists and experts is frequently discounted, this is all the more important. Hence, it is singled out in the new document. While MCU 1988 held that universities should reject intolerance, that word was used largely to refer to a lack of intellectual openness. In contrast, MCU 2020 explicitly broadens the idea so that it includes racism and prejudice. We're told in the new document, universities are non-discriminatory spaces of tolerance and respect, where diversity of perspectives flourishes and where inclusivity, anchored in principles of equity and fairness, prevails. And that insertion of equity and fairness into the value framework of the academy is a major step forward in the new MCU. It's part of that overall drift I've alluded to from canons of value that bespeak the health and well-being of institutions to canons of value which act for the good of human beings in isolation as well as in societies. And this brings me to what is the heart of the matter, quite literally. The last three paragraphs of MCU 2020 are a major statement, not about the humanistic academic tradition, but about humanity itself and the subordinate yet critically important role institutions must play in the fulfillment of human promise. Education is a human right, a public good, and should be available to all, it declares. And we are told also that universities serve diverse learners at all stages of their lives. And then comes the part that speaks, in my mind, to the greatest shift of all in academic culture over the last 30 years. The acknowledgement that equity and justice require us not only to promote accessibility of underrepresented students and communities, but to give up some control over the modes and matters of academic study. That will certainly bring enormous benefit to universities in that it will disrupt the perpetual process of intellectual and cultural self-replication. Just to think of the benefits that will accrue to society from universities' pursuit of this principle is, in my view, exciting beyond measure. Seibold, I'm going to leave it there so we can move on to Tamiris.
Thank you very much, Patrick. That was a great explanation. When you were in the beginning of your intervention, lauding the 1988 statement, I was reminded of the old joke, how many people does one need to change a light bulb? And then the good answer is 4, 3 to say how good the old one was, and 1 to actually change the new one. But I mean, in this particular case, it is very important. I mean, I spoke about the relationship between the two texts as between a mother and a daughter. And it's very important to say that, I mean, in many essential aspects, all the traits of the daughter are in the mother already. And when you read it carefully with our present situation in mind, you discover much more rich aspects than just the autonomy and academic freedom, how important they may be. But thank you also for going on to explain why the responsibilities of universities were thought to really have to be mentioned and spoken about more explicitly. So thank you very, very, very much. And now it's my pleasure to hand on to Tamiris. Tamiris, very good to see you. It's been a long time since we actually saw each other in the same room, but this is as good a replacement as it gets. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Seibold. Hey, Patrick, and hello, everyone. It's good to see, even in this platform, Paula, Marcelo, David, Francesco, Shanita, Mohammed, and in this first one, Valmor. I'm just seeing that one in this first place. So hello, everyone. I am Tamiris. I am former president of the Law Students Union of University of Mackenzie, and I'm also former vice president of the National Students Union of Brazil. I have a presentation because I'm from Brazil, so I speak Portuguese and I'm a bit nervous in speaking English, so I will share with you a presentation to help me with that. So just wait. Can you see the presentation? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. What the new MCU means for students. Here in this, I have one picture of the final plenary of the National Students Union Congress in 2017. Here in Brazil, our National Students Congress reunite in one place a kind of 10,000 students from all over the country. So the students movement here in Brazil is very active, and we have the local students union, we have state students union, and we have the national students union, that it's kind of an umbrella organization of all the students organization. So, and the second one is the reading of the Bergeron Declaration. That is a declaration that was written in 2016 by a group of students leaders from all over the world. We had students from Brazil, from Colombia, from Canada, but also from Spain, and Norway, and other countries from Europe. And then we have also from South Africa, in African continent, and from Asia, and from Iceland Pacific. So the Bergeron Declaration was drafted by and agreed owned by participating national students union from all over the world during the Global Students' Voice Seminar in Bergen. The Global Students' Voice Seminar was a seminar that were organized by the European Students' Union in Norway, and that reunite students leaders from not just from Europe, but from other countries too, to think how that we can create a kind of global students organization, that how that we can like share our struggles and our ideas and organize ourselves as students leaders in a global perspective. In the Bergeron Declaration, we have this idea, uniting for a global student's voice. And we share in this declaration some principles and some struggles that for us were very important in that time, but it's like now even so important. So that it's education as a human right that should be available for all. We talk about students' rights and quality education, students' organization, autonomy in the students' organization, etc. We talk about access to tertiary education, and this access, like realizing that education as a human right should be available for all. So, and need to be recognized as a public good and a universal good. We also talk about sustainability, mobility, and safety. And in this point, I want to share with you, because one of the students leaders that write the declaration with us were from Niue, that is an island in Pacific. And he talked to us that his island was disappearing because the sea was like taking away the place. So because of the climate changes, he may be lose his home, and our country actually. So talking about sustainability is not just talking about, I mean, we as students leaders need to talk about sustainability, because the climate changing and are put in danger students from all over the world, and not just put in danger but they are lost in their homes, their countries. Like an entire island could be just vanish because of that. So we talk about sustainability and how the student movement can help with that, and how that we need to talk to students from all over the world what is happening, and that we need to create more sustainability policies and mobility to safety of the students. And we finished talking about the Global Students' Voice, that it's a kind of need of this umbrella global organization that now I'm very happy to talk to you, that realized that happened as the Global Student Forum, that represents the umbrella organization of the Latin American students, the European students, the African students, and some national students organizations from Asia and from Pacific. So in 2016, we organized this seminar, and now we have actually this Global Students Forum. So the MCU 1988 and students, I put this, that is the only phrase that talk about students in the first MCU, the first Magna Carta Universitatum. That is, each university must, with due allowance for particular circumstances, ensure that its students' freedoms are safeguarded and that they enjoy concessions in which they can acquire the cultural and training which is their purpose to possess. This is the only phrase, the only moment that the MCU of 1988 talk about students. And I put this for you because in the new MCU 2020, not just because they talk more about students, but I think that the principles that we put in this new MCU reflect what the students' movements in all over the world are struggling. So Seibold told that the first one was right just for rectors from the mailing university from Europe, and now this MCU 2020 were right by male and female and students, professors, and rectors. And I think that because of that, we can share, we can share what is the struggles and what is the principle and what is the diversity of the university has like nowadays. So we begin the new Magna Carta, the Magna Carta Universitatum Declaration and affirmation of the fundamental principle upon which the missions of university should be based, was signed in 1988 on the occasion of the 200th anniversary of the University of Bologna. And then I put in the second one. Here in Brazil, we learned that the tripod that provides the basis for higher education is teaching, research, and extension. And I think that we need to talk about the principles being implemented. And I would say that there is another tripod that is the direction of university, the professors, and the students. So we, as students, leaders, as a student movement, always want to be recognized as an active actors of the university, not just passive. We are not in the university just to be learners. We are in university to construct the university with the professors and with the direction. We are active actors in that place that build, acknowledge, that build research about a lot of things. So worldwide, the students movement call for great students' participations in the directions of the university. And when we include students in MCU 2020, we are recognizing them as fundamental part of implementing these principles, I think. So here I put some phrases that we include students. So we talk about students in search for knowledge and great understanding. We talk about the diversity of students seeking a university education. And in that point, I need to say that if you weren't this change that happened in the past 30 years, I probably weren't here with you, because I am a Black woman from the suburb of São Paulo. And if it weren't the public policy, if it weren't affirmative actions that were created in this past year, I probably won't be in university at all. I probably will not be a master, and I probably will not able to apply the exam for the PhD of USP that I will try in this next semester here in São Paulo. So the diversity of the students that are seeking university education increased, because in this past year, we have a lot of public policies, I think, that make this can be possible for these students. So we talk also about encourage the critical thinkings in our students and scholars, that I think academic freedom, open inquiry and dialogue, and the university as a non-discriminatory space of tolerance and respect, where diversity perspectives flourish and were inclusive, anchored in principles of equity and fairness prevails. This is also very important, because we as our students leaders and in the students movement always talk about how that we need to fight struggles as the racism, as the sexism, that it's reflected in university, because the university is part of the society, and the society are a kind of racist and sexist, and the university needs to help the students, the professors, the director of the university need to help them to fight against that. The university can't accept this kind of discriminatories in that space. And the final one, I guess, that is, the education is a human right, a public good, and should be available to all. This point, I remember that I talk a lot in our groups, our meetings, that it's important, not because we put that in Bergeron Declaration, but because students in all over the world talk about that. We need to recognize that education is a human right, is a public good, and that everyone can be and need to have access of that. And the education should be available to all. And we know that even now, we are not living that. Education is not available to all. But I think that MCU as a declaration of principles, it's important for the university to recognize that we need to seek a world that everyone have right to have access of education in all kind, because we in the sequence talk about the university recognize that learning is a lifelong activity, and that tertiary education is one part of a continuum. And I think that it's important for us to know that, because we need to seek for a world that everyone have access for this all part of education, learning, and process. So in the end, what the new MCU means for students, I think that the new MCU is a kind of recognition that we are part of the university, not only as passive subject, but as an active actors who are part of the construction and implementation of these principles that MCU defends. So, So to finish, I just want to thank you. For me, it's really a pleasure to be part of this drafting group and to represent the students in the process of the drafting of the new MCU. I try to talk with the student leaders from all over the world, the students from ESU, from ASU, from OCLAI here in Brazil, from some other national students union, and in all the students leaders that I talk were happy because we had a students representation in this drafting group, and this is a kind of recognition that we as students are part of the university too. So thank you very much to be here.
Thank you very much, Tamiris. As ever, so vigorous and clear. And your point that the university is not a theater where students are being spoken to, but is a creative community where students are co-creators and therefore are co-responsible for the shaping of that space, is an absolute critical point. I know from experience in many places that this in many places still is an ideal that has to be worked towards, and it cannot yet be taken for granted. But we hope with the present text we have made a clear and definite step into the right direction. And thank you very much for your advocacy and your contribution to it today and in the times that we were working on the declaration. Well, this is the moment in our session where we have time for an exchange of questions, opinions with you in the audience. The best way to do this is write a short note in the chat box, and then we pick it up and move from there. While you are considering to post a question in the chat box, I have a question to Patrick and Tamiris. I mean, stating that these values are important to the academic community, to the university, implies a question: how does one do this? This is, it seems to me, not just the responsibility of the leadership of a university, but it seems to me that it invites the university to really do a grassroots build up of this shared conviction and these shared ideals. Would you agree? And if so, how does one do that? How does one make this a community conviction rather than just a proclamation of the Vice Chancellor every now and then?
Tamiris, would you like me to jump in first?
Yes, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, okay. So I'll begin by saying, I mean, I think the formal declaration always has utility. In the day-to-day life of any university, there are occasions when it is useful to allude to this document as the stated commitment of the institution. And that does have a persuasive power. You know, if you're, for example, pursuing some important policy change or something of that sort, pointing to the values as declared and endorsed by the institution in that document can be useful in actually advancing the cause within the institution. But I think you're quite right, Seibold, in the sense that there's a limited power of influence that is derived from the document in that way. I think you have to make these principles come alive. So there are two ways of doing this, I suppose. One is to engage in something like the values project that the observatory has run, and that's to maintain an ongoing dialogue with the members of the university community about the extent to which we're living up to these values. It's a hard thing to do just in isolation. It seems to me that the most useful way is to build these values and responsibilities, or recognition of these responsibilities, into the day-to-day planning of the institution. And key to that is, I think, the important act of translation. I mean, we tried in drafting this document to make it as clear as possible, but this document and the earlier one both recognize that these principles need to be adapted within each culture, both specific university cultures and more broadly. So I think, you know, it's not, you know, it can be as simple as making the MCU 2020 part of the material which is considered in a strategic planning and policy making part of the university's activities. But I think the more effective way is for institutions to think about what these principles mean and how they are best likely to be articulated in order to find support inside the institution, and then to translate them to the university communities so as to get some kind of grassroots support for them. Because I think it's rather like what we've learned about, you know, experiential learning as opposed to listening to someone proclaim from the stage. These values are not really going to be lived unless we build them into the day-to-day experience of life on campus. And so that's what I would say on that side.
Tamiris?
I agree with Patrick, and I would say that the program Living Values, it's a way that we can discuss that with the university from all over the world that signed the Magna Carta of Universitatum, actually, because when we read a document, a declaration that has a lot of beautiful words, but if these words don't reflect the action of the university, of the actions of the professors, of the students in university, are just words, you know. So I think that we need to create some ways to put this principle being alive in university, you know. So when we talk about access of university, we need to see if the university really has some strategies to get access in university. When we talk about academic freedom, we need to see if the university really make able to the scholars, to the professor, really research what they want, you know. So when you talk about autonomy, we need to see if really the university give autonomy to the students' organizations, to the professors' organizations, and we are not in the, I mean, the politicals or government ways idea are not reflecting what the university support, you know. So, and I think that living values program of the MCU is it's good, because we are saying as Magna Carta Observatory that we are not just celebrating words, but we really want to see these words, this principle being active in the university that sign that.
Thank you very much, Tamires. This makes it absolutely clear that this is not a proclamation to just be proclaimed, but it is a tool that must be used, or a text that needs to be translated into practice. And I mean, you refer to the Living Values project of the Magna Carta Observatory. That is a project that has been tested with some dozens of universities so far, and it has shown very clearly that it is a real valuable, a useful, and a very positive experience for institutions to engage in a community-based discussion on values and what they mean, not just in times of crisis when you have a problem to solve or when you have an opponent that you're facing, but as a matter of course, something that you need to know what you want to be as an institution, how and on which base you prioritize your programs, and so on and so on. So this is a clear explanation of those tool qualities of the statement. By the way, talking about translations, on the website of the Magna Carta, you'll find translations into the 6 languages of the United Nations. So in Chinese, in Russian, in the Arab language, in Spanish, in French, in English. But we are, like with the old translation, we are hoping that we will have dozens of translations in many different languages of the world, because in translating it, we also bridge the gap of a formal language in another tongue than ourselves. I mean, I always love to add to that the 1988 statement was originally written in Latin, and the much of the language of that statement in a way shows that it was conceived as a solemn Latin text. So we want it to be closer to all of us right now. Is there anyone in our group around the table who would like to raise a question to one of us? I see no remarks in the chat. Anyone thinks that you would like to see clarified or added to?
So, well, perhaps I could make an observation that just occurred to me, thinking about the uses to which this document can be productively put. In the earlier session, the question arose about how universities can protect themselves against challenges that threaten things like autonomy and academic freedom. And I will observe, this is just from my own experience, that the existence of a document of this sort, endorsed in the case of the 1988 version by more than 900 institutions worldwide, is a fairly potent element to introduce into discussions with government, who are often unaware that such things exist or that they're being watched by an observatory. And I think there is a way in which we need to think about the uses of MCU 2020 in the same way. Because implicit in that is that we imagine universities now very much part of the education for sustainable development and social justice movement. And I think this document will play just as effectively in relations with governments as the earlier one did.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It is absolutely crucial to keep that in mind. On the other hand, I mean, we should also realize that the world has over 20,000 universities, and many of them are driven by commercial interests. Many of them are driven by very narrow interests of their owners. Others are very much driven by the direct interests of the ideological or political powers that steer them. So in a way, in pleading for autonomy and freedom, in making these statements that we do in this new Magna Carta, we are also building a front. We are also fighting for these ideals to be adhered to and to be living values in universities. Universities that do support these ideals and want to go this way, thereby are going a very different routes from those universities that are driven by commercial interests or very narrowly defined owners' interests. If I'm not mistaken, it would be good to have more of a debate also at a global level about these differences and about these tensions. I mean, from the 8 years that I have been working with the Magna Carta project now, I have learned that there are many places in the world, also in places where we would not expect this, where things are not easy at all. Okay, but probably in this particular session, preaching to the converted, I have a question from Jens Fra Jensen, and his question is, if you accept the second tripod of Tamiris, that universities are based on the direction, the professors and the students, why are the professional organizations of the educators in Education International not included in the work? Does that ring a bell, that question, to anyone? Patrick, Tamiris?
I'm not sure I have a specific answer for the question, although I would sort of go back to what I said earlier on about how you mobilize the MCU 2020. I think reaching educators, not just administrators, with this document or with the values that it embodies is obviously critically important. If we're to see these values inform the educational experience generally that we offer, obviously the people who are on the front line of delivering that need to know it, to endorse it, and to be able to make that translation I was talking about. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but it's a thought anyway in that direction.
Is that an invitation to professional organizations to come forward and endorse the statement?
I would think so.
And actually here in Brazil, when we make some discussions about this document, we actually include the professionals, organizations, like we include professors, students, and the direction. So I think that in some way, these organizations were part of the work of the new Magna Carta.
All right.
Well, you may recall that when we did the wide consultation, many rectors' conferences and other organizations contributed their views on this. also when we were going out to various meetings, talking about what was then a draft, a very early draft of the new document, we were very warmly welcomed by conferences in Latin America, in Europe, who wanted to discuss the document with us. So I think these associations have been involved, but perhaps not as explicitly as we might see.
Thank you, David. Well, maybe a suggestion for a further international meeting involving professional organizations. I mean, if we are to, and I think we are, to stand up and defend the autonomous university, we need all the powers we have and everyone we can mobilize to really do that. Another question from Martin Hellström from the University of the University West in Sweden, and this question is goes: in what way do you think can lifelong learning and lifelong learning concepts contribute to universities' ambitions to reach out with democratic and ethic values, sustainability, etc.? Tamiris, any thoughts?
Martin, in what way do you think that can contribute to reach? I think that in the way that we were talking in the first question of Cybele, you know, we need to understand that these principles are not just, and these active values is not just about the word, it's not just about the declaration, it's about how the university organized. So when we talk about sustainability, when I talk about values, we need to see if these are being implemented in the daily of the university, if the professors talk about that in the classes, if the students can organize other students to create that in the university also. So I think that is that we made these principles as a lifelong learning when we understand that they are not just word, but they are about our daily, the day, and how we organize, how we communicate, and how we treat the students and the professors and the direction, you know. So I think that this.
Patrick?
I would want to take us back to Jamil's star design for the new educational model. You'll remember he put up a graphic representation of what our current model is, which was a sort of monolithic structure with two layers, I believe, undergraduate and graduate study. But then this was in the context of him talking about a need for a new economic model and a new social model and so on. The new educational model was that wonderful star design, which the message of which was universities operate on society and in society on many more fronts than simply through research and teaching. Those are critically important. But the other points of the star looked at, I can't remember the details of the diagram, but basically what he was doing was drawing our attention to the fact that universities can be powerful agents in society, especially if they recognize they have a diverse and wider range of tools at their disposal than we typically think. And that's where I think the issue of learning and lifelong learning comes in. I mean, part of the old model is the assumption that we intervene particularly during a 4-year period of someone's youthful years, and then they move on. Whereas the idea of a university which is not only immersed in its community, shares infrastructure with its community, continues to have an intellectual and educational dialogue with the members of its community on an ongoing basis throughout their lives. I think that's a terribly exciting model because of what it says about inclusivity, what it says about the the potential of the university to achieve its goals in a much more dramatic and pervasive way in society than is the case if we stick to the old model. So I would go there. I don't know, David, if we're going to circulate the slides that Jamil used in his presentation, because I'd be very keen to put that star diagram in front of people again, because I think it really does go to answer this question in a really helpful way.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And yes, there was an earlier question. Do we all get access to the materials? Yes, we can. The recording will be made available on the website of Magna Carta, and the slides will be made available there as well. So you can study them at your leisure. We have a second question from Fra Jensen. In one of the earlier presentations, there was a reference to Denmark as a place where not all subjects are, in the opinion of some political representatives in Danish Parliament, to be taught at universities. So university freedom of teaching and learning is under pressure. And he says, can a complaint be filed at the Magna Carta Observatory? Are you responding to such complaints, and are you sending signals when you receive those complaints? Patrick.
In some ways, Seibold, since you've sat in this chair of mine for a good deal longer than the 3 days I've occupied it, you might be the person to answer that question. I mean, the first thing I'd want to say about it is there is an odd ambivalence in the observatory and what it exists to do. Some would look at the MCU and see it as a summative document against which institutions should be measured. And to some extent, we do that in deciding who should sign it or not. But there is also that dimension of the work of the observatory that is formative. And so we've heard the Living Values Project being discussed. And my sense is that if you look at MCU 2020, that's a signal that we see ourselves more in the formative than in the judgmental and enforcement business. I mean, the name of the institution might lead some to think that our job is to be a watchdog, and we are over values. But I'm not sure what we would do with a complaint filed with the MCO, other than that there will be circumstances, and there have been, in which there is a need for the MCO to intervene in support of signatory institutions that may be under threat in one way or another. But in my much shorter membership in the organization, I wouldn't say that has been a major part of what we do. But Seibold and David, I think you're in a better position to comment on this than I.
Well, I may be overstepping my mandate, but what I would say is that the authority and the strength of authority of the Magna Carta community is not only the persuasion powers of the statements, but it's the power of the subscribing universities. So the signatory universities, they are the defendant, the heroes of the autonomy and the academic freedom we stand for. And in a country like Denmark, a good number of universities have already dozens of years ago subscribed to the earlier statement, and they will no doubt do this now. So the kind of thing that I would suggest that could be done is that the Magna Carta Observatory, together with those signatory universities in Denmark refer to our ideals and our principles and say, if Parliament, if politicians are intruding upon the autonomy of universities this way, they should realize they're intruding into the very core model of what a good university in a country like Denmark is and ought to be. So join forces with the signatory universities and then make a joint statement against those political powers. But I mean, this is not an exception. I mean, this is happening in Denmark now. I was recently having a discussion on the situation in the state of Wisconsin in the United States, where teachers at the state universities are obliged to file their syllabi with the state legislature for inspection prior to teaching. I mean, this is a very clear infringement of the academic freedom in the university. So this is a kind of thing that is pardon the comparison, is spreading like a virus. It is happening in many different countries, and by the way, not at all only in countries that we often talk about as being repressive. Okay, I would suggest that we leave it at this. I have been told that all the videos, the 2 videos that were planned for this session and the 2 videos that were planned for the earlier session are up and running. So I'd like to thank Patrick and Tamiris for their contributions. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being with us in this session. And please return tomorrow when we celebrate the launch of the new Magna Carta statement, and be partners and stand united in the years to come. There's lots of things to do, and there are many challenges to be fought. Thank you very much. David, back to you.
Thank you very much. Had we all been gathering together in the same hall, there would at this point have been a longer and a louder set of applause or applauses. One for your magnificent work in leading the drafting group and presenting this morning, but a louder applause to celebrate your 8 years of leading the observatory as the chairman of its governing body. So can I follow Patrick's lead by asking those with us on the call to do the best they can to say thank you, Seibold, for all that you have done for the observatory. And I now move on to talk about videos. My first words are those of thanks. We actually received over 60 videos from signatories. Had we been meeting together, you would have been talking to each other in the coffee breaks and over meals, and you would have been sharing what your universities were doing. This format doesn't lend itself to that very well, so we invited signatories to submit videos showing how the principles, values, and responsibilities of the new Magna Carta are being put into practice. Now, all of those videos are going to be accessible from our website. And the observatory's working group, which has had the hardest job this year, is the working group which viewed the 60 videos and had to come up with a selection which showed the range of the values in practice and being put into practice by different universities around the world. And out of that, we managed to find time in the program for 16 of those 60 plus videos to be shown. I'd like to say a particular thanks to the signatories that have prepared videos, because they did so at a time when COVID restrictions were in place. They wanted to involve students, and the quality of the videos is absolutely amazing. So they will remain as a permanent resource after this event, and they will be accessible from the Magna Carta's website.
Research and scientific independence, access to research infrastructure, education based on empirical knowledge, supporting autonomy and scientific development. 59 research clubs, creative freedom, openness to dialogue and tolerance, activities for the disabled, international students, partner universities in 46 countries, 500 patents, activities for the community, responding to the needs of the present day. Recycling, that is, care for sustainable development. Social responsibility.
The University of Valladolid, a public university committed to the creation and transmission of knowledge through teaching, research, innovation and transfer activities with the purpose of contributing to public good and social transformation. Our participatory governing model, based on democratic principles and values, aims to engage diverse voices and perspectives in spaces of debate and dialogue, encouraging critical thinking in all students and scholars. The University of Valladolid is committed to the principle of equity. Since 2013, the Unity of Equity is engaged with the implementation and fulfillment of an action plan designed around three main principles. Specialized service that provides information, consultancy and support on equity for all the community university members. Commitment to education on values, engaging academic staff and students in more than 30 programs on education per year, aiming at promoting gender equality for a more democratic, equal and fair society. And social engagement with civil society and local communities. Recognizing that learning is a lifelong activity and being aware of the projection that the university has in its immediate environment, the University of Valladolid is committed to the University of Experience, which aims to give the elderly the possibility of accessing culture as a formula for personal growth, a space for generational exchange and a means of solidary participation in society.
Round of applause for Carla there. Just a little pressure on that one, but well done. And it's brought us to a conclusion bang on the minute that we said we would conclude. So can I just, in summary, thank everybody who has contributed to this morning, everybody who has produced videos, all of you for joining us this morning, and can I join Seibold in saying I hope that we'll welcome you back tomorrow morning to see the first signing and the launch of MCU 2020. Thank you and goodbye.